I know you got into it in your book about Luka Doncic. I know you got into the Brunson Dallas dynamic. And what did you learn in your reporting for the book about what went down or the aftermath of Jalen Brunson and the Mavs divorce?
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff that is pretty obvious. And the number one thing you know going in and is reinforced, Mark Cuban's full of crap. My favorite thing is Cuban's insistence of, we would have outbid the Knicks. We had no idea what the number is. They wouldn't tell us the number. It's like, did you lose your internet connection? It was widely reported. I reported, and I wasn't alone, days in advance of free agency that it was going to be 4 years in excess of $100 million. It ended up being $104 million, obviously. And, the interesting thing, Rick Brunson, this will shock you to know, but Rick Brunson was awfully chatty. We had coffee at a Starbucks in Dallas when they came through last year. And, the one thing that Rick said is they thought when the Mavericks scheduled that meeting, that because at that point, there's only one way the Mavericks can salvage the situation, and that is, sorry, Jalen, here is a couple of Brinks trucks. We're backing it up for you. Come on, let's make the decision difficult. They thought Cuban was going to come up there and throw a max deal on the table, which they would have been killed for, and it would have aged well, right? Just like the Knicks, honestly, were killed for 4 years, 104. And man, did that age well. And Rick says that Jalen looked at him and basically said, if it's that, I've got to take it. And Rick was like, yeah, you do. Absolutely. Well, we can buy a house in Dallas. But obviously that situation didn't play out that way. And, it's interesting. And this is the world of what ifs. But I am convinced that if Jalen Brunson would have re-signed in Dallas, whether it was on the extension that Mavericks were way too late in offering, or, if they'd have decided, okay, we can't just let him go to New York. We've got to, throw the max on the table and make him make a difficult decision. I think he would have ended up in New York anyway. I just think it would have been on the other side of the bridge. I think he would have ended up being traded for Kyrie Irving. Just because, listen, the Mavericks never, or at least Mark Cuban, never looked at Jalen Brunson as a legitimate star. And he's not alone in that. He wasn't necessarily a proven star. He's just a guy who got better and better and better and better. Certainly looked like a star in the playoffs that year. But once Kyrie became available, I don't think that that the Mavericks would have been able to pass on the chance to add that level of star. So I think Brunson would have been up with the Brooklyn Nets had he have returned to Dallas.
That's fascinating. And I think that would have driven Knicks brass nuts because they targeted Jalen for a long time. So maybe the Knicks then end up trading for Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges at some point with Sean Marks. But the what ifs are fascinating to me, Tim. Do you know ultimately in that Mavs Jalen Brunson meeting, was there a number put out there? What was the conversation like at that point?
So the meeting was called off, but the number that had been discussed was "quote unquote" Fred VanVleet money, which at the time was $21 million a year.
Yeah.
And so 5 years, 105 versus 4 years, 104. Like, come on, it's not as Rick Brunson said, make me make a hard decision. That's not a hard decision. That's common sense. But it's funny again. Fred VanVleet money was the line in the sand, just like Mike Bibby money was the line in the sand on Steve Nash back in the day.
Oh, wow. How about that for a parallel?
Yes. Steve Nash, who was brought up, by the way, in the post-draft introductory press conference when Jalen Brunson's sitting right there. And it wasn't brought up because of Jalen Brunson. It was brought up because he was represented by Bill Duffy, who repped Luka Doncic, who was sitting right there. And Donnie Nelson made the awkward, uncomfortable, in hindsight, jab at Mark Cuban joke. Hey, Bill, let's make sure this one stays in a Mavericks uniform. And by the way, Donnie also gave a shout out in that press conference to Jalen Brunson's agent, a pretty accomplished dude named Leon Rose, who, by the way, in that contract negotiated that the last year would be, the language in the last year would make Brunson unrestricted going into year 4. So that, the Mavericks didn't have the right to match because of some, some semantics in the contract negotiated by the guy who ended up bringing Brunson to New York, and obviously has known him since he was a newborn baby.
So many dots to connect, both here in New York and over there in Dallas. And Jeff, for you, what was your initial thought? I'm just curious, and you could be honest. Your initial thought on the Knicks trading off their veterans to create the cap space to sign Brunson, basically being all in on Brunson that summer.
I hope it works.
Yeah,
because that was the number one thing that I had, and they asked for the trust, and they asked for fans to trust in the front office. And what I saw them building so far, I said, okay, you have a personal relationship with this dude. Is this going to be the type of nepotism where your cousin isn't really qualified, but you're going to get him a job, or they are qualified, but they just need the opportunity? And we see that it was more so the latter. It's funny listening to Tim, and I definitely want to tap into the book to hear what the spin is on losing Brunson. The object of your affection becomes more attractive when other people desire it. But when you're talking about people, they have the right to say, you should have liked me when I was hot, when I wasn't hot. Now I'm hot. They all on me, right? So it's just hilarious how it gets spun to that where, and Tim, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Brunson approached them with the idea to extend or to work on a deal, and they said hold off. And now I'm thinking about it. Are you upset that he left? Or are you upset that you couldn't use him in a trade package later on down the line?
Well, and there's no question about that, especially if the max extension for him was 4 years, 55 and change. 4 years, call it 56, rounding up. Which, are you kidding me? What an unbelievable trade chip that would be. And Rick Brunson talked to me about when they go on their vacation to Jamaica, where Jalen's mom's family is from. They go there every summer, and that summer going into that, they're like, oh man, $56 million. Can you? They thought it was happening. Mm-hmm. And again, Rick Brunson's perspective, a guy who grinded for every nickel he made in the NBA, 9 years in the league, never had a guaranteed dime, not 1 minute on a guaranteed contract. To we're taking this. He said he even would have, if they'd have given him a little discount, 4 years for 50, which is hilarious. And the Mavericks were like, hold off. And, it was a new coach. It was a new GM. But really, ultimately, it was Mark Cuban. And Cuban thought going into that season that there wasn't going to be much of a market for Brunson. He thought it was going to be more of a mid-level type of market, which was, 4 years, a little bit more than $40 million at the time. He was only wrong by about $60 million, but hey, and then they went back to him though. It was the weird, coming out of the bubble COVID season, and the Mavericks had a COVID outbreak. Luka, was reported out of shape. They shut him down for a little bit with some ankle stuff. Then he got COVID. Brunson kept the Mavericks' head above water during that whole time, and established himself, went from a 6-man to a starter, and they went back to the Mavericks in early January and said, hey, we said we weren't going to negotiate during the season, but if you put it on the table now, we'll sign it. No. And the reason it was no then is the same reason they didn't offer Dorian Finney-Smith the same identical deal until right after the trade deadline, right? Mm-hmm. If you extend him at that point, you can't include him in a deal before the trade deadline. And they were, who's going to be the co-star next to Luka? Who's going to be the co-star next to Luka? Which is another way of saying we don't think this guy's capable, right? And then obviously Brunson, again, every year of his career continuing in New York, he's gotten better and better and better. And the first time you really kind of looked at him and said, maybe he is legitimately that co-star, is the first round of those playoffs. Luka's nursing a calf strain for those first few games, and the guy goes for 41 and 31 against the Jazz, and off they go. He's the second best player on a team that went to the West Finals. And so, but they still, the criticism of the Knicks was it was an overpay. I remember looking at the contract then and looking at the starting point guard contracts in the league, and it was about right in the middle. And my thought was Brunson's going to be a top 10 starting point guard. And I was pretty confident of that. So I didn't think it was a bad contract. I didn't think he was going to be fifth on an MVP voting a couple years later. Mm-hmm. By the way, neither did Brunson, neither did his dad, neither did Leon Rose, neither did Tibbs. The guy just keeps exceeding expectations.